Rage, deep and burning rage. There was also pain, a kind I had never experienced before. I felt an overwhelming desire to kill or be killed. I had never been this furious in my life. Some might say I was still young and that life would present other situations to evoke such anger, but I don't think so. This kind of anger is something no one should have to deal with. Any anger that drives someone to want to take another's life is dangerous. At that moment, I wanted to kill two people, and I knew that once I revealed myself, I would have to be extremely cautious to avoid ending up in prison. Why was I so angry? It all started about 5 weeks ago when my wife began to change, like a chameleon before my eyes. She shifted from being loving and attentive to making sarcastic remarks, delivering insults, and being dismissive. She started refusing intimacy, including the things couples do together in bed. That immediately raised my suspicions, as I once had a girlfriend who cheated on me, teaching me some painful lifelong lessons. I never mentioned the first cheater to the second one now in my life, but I doubt it would have made a difference. By the second week of her change, I decided to investigate further. I'm not the type to hire a private investigator or seek outside help with my problems. I'm a hands-on guy and handle my own issues. I followed her from work during lunchtime. When she pulled into a motel parking lot and briskly walked to room 104, I knew she was cheating. Her job didn't require her to meet customers outside the workplace. In fact, she didn't deal with customers at all, working in the record-keeping department. That first discovery hurt, but not as much as her taunts and insults already had. The man she met was a co-worker from a different department, someone rumored to be on the fast track up the corporate ladder. After seeing them meet 3 times in 2 weeks, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I'm too frugal to spend money on confirming what I already knew, so I waited until now, knowing my wife was behind this door in another man's arms. I won't kill them, I won't kill them, I repeated to myself, hoping it would prevent me from doing something rash. It was going to be a close call. I had to confront them and get photographic evidence. In this state, I could still sue for alienation of affection, and her employer would also face consequences for allowing it. My guess was that Mr. On the Way Up was soon to be on the way out. I needed the pictures and then to serve my soon-to-be ex-wife the divorce papers. As I stood there, locks on our house were being changed, the locksmith having been paid by me just before I left home. I had moved all our money around and split it evenly. I had canceled all our credit cards. I had taken many steps over the past 2 weeks, and now the final confrontation was about to begin. I wasn't sure how Simone would react. I suspect she will be relieved rather than upset, though she might feel quite guilty for a few moments. Of course, my lawyer, who has plenty of experience with divorces, assured me that guilt would pass once she hires her own lawyer. You might wonder if I still love her. Right now, I feel nothing but open, intense hatred. At the same time, I'm internally conflicted, hoping she truly loves me and that this is just a mistake on her part, a lapse in judgment we might be able to fix. Logically, I know that's unlikely. I can't stay married to someone who cheated on me. There's not a shred of trust left. The love I have for her is just a lingering part of me that hasn't yet come to terms with this sudden and complete betrayal. The motel manager handed me the key to their room. $100 bill and a promise not to make a mess were all it took. He seemed like a decent guy, and I didn't blame him for my wife and her lover choosing this place for their rendezvous. He even mentioned similarities between us and his ex-wife. In slow motion, I inserted the key and quietly opened the door. Stepping into the room, I left the door slightly ajar. I aimed the camera and stepped fully inside. Flash. Man, I love this digital camera, I thought, ironically pleased that she had given it to me for my birthday 3 months ago. She screamed at the guy to get off her. He looked furious and started to get up. I took several more pictures, capturing every detail, the marks where he had been on her, his arousal, and the mess they made. Simone was crying, trying to cover herself while he did something foolish. I had hoped he would make a stupid move, it made my next action feel justified. What the hell? Who are you? Get out of here before I kick your ass. I'm her soon-to-be ex-husband. As for whose ass will get kicked, that's up for debate. I don't think it will be mine. I moved aside as he approached. Setting the camera down, I turned slightly to the right, letting him come up on my left. Then, I swung my arm up and hit him squarely in the jaw with all my anger, pain, and a touch of fear. Fear? Yes, fear. I was scared I might kill this idiot, and he just wasn't worth it. He hit the floor, out cold. I must have been angrier than I thought. I bent over to check his pulse, suddenly worried I might have killed him. That would have been tragic, for me. There was a pulse, so I relaxed. Simone was ranting about something, but when I turned to face her, she went silent, fear choking her voice. She had never seen me like this before. Well, enjoy your new partner. He's all yours now. I want nothing more to do with your cheating self. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, shaking and hugging herself. She couldn't meet my gaze, something I had noticed happening more frequently lately. Now, she knew that I knew. The game was up. She glanced at me standing over her lover and shivered. Her eyes didn't linger on me for long. Here are the typical papers served in situations like this. I'm suing for divorce. The locks on the house have been changed. I've set up a bank account with your half of everything. You're served, we're through, thanks for nothing. The papers landed on her knees, which were half exposed from the sheet she was trying to hide under. She looked at them, then into my eyes. She said nothing. For the first time in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I felt nothing. Two kinds of nothing filled that room. Mine would be more painful in the end, but right now, she knew there was nothing she could say to make things right between us. I even sensed she might not know how to make things right and that us hadn't existed for longer than these last weeks. I turned and left, hearing her plead with me as I walked out the door. Wait. Let me explain. Please, Jonathan. Please. I kept walking. I couldn't let her see my eyes right then. They were welling up with tears, and I knew that if I turned, I would weaken in my resolve. There was too much water under the bridge and too many issues now. What once was no more. When I arrived home, I found the locksmith patiently waiting. He had changed all 3 entry locks and reprogrammed the garage door opener. I thanked him for doing the job on such short notice and tipped him a 20. Inside the house that had once been a home, I sat at the kitchen table and reflected on our years together. I didn't know why Simone had changed or why she suddenly decided I was less than what she had originally seen in me. I didn't know one damn reason why she had done this. I didn't know that we were done. In 5 weeks, the pain and words had made me a different man, but Simone had missed a change just as I had missed the changes in her. The phone rang. Seeing it was Simone's mom on the caller ID, I answered. John, what's going on? Simone came over here in tears saying that she'd ruined your marriage. What's happened? Well, Doris, it's like this. Simone will have to tell you what happened, but suffice it to say that I found her in a motel room today and served her the divorce papers. Why, John? I don't understand this at all. Look, I'm really sorry, Doris. You know that I love you and Sam with all my heart, and this whole thing is tough on all of us, but it has to be this way. Tears were running down my cheeks now. I truly loved Simone's parents. They had been very good to me over the years Simone and I had been together, and hearing the pain and confusion in Doris's voice cut deep. I was glad this was taking place over the phone. I didn't want them to see me like this. John, can't you two work it out somehow? I don't think so, Doris. This is a biggie. A seriously huge biggie, and it's one of those biggies that destroy everything. The silence on the other end of the phone told me that Doris was struggling to process the sudden and harsh news. I felt for her, especially since just last night we had dinner with Doris and Sam, and Simone had put on a show of affection in front of her parents. The whole act had been surprising to me. We had fought on the way there, and I received the cold shoulder on the way home, but while at Doris and Sam's, we acted like the perfect couple. I hid our argument to avoid upsetting Sam with his daughter's behavior, but in hindsight, I should have given them some warning before taking the drastic steps I just had. Sam's health was fragile, worn down by years of hard labor and smoking. Doris was in good health but constantly worried about Sam, so I regretted not giving them a heads up about all this mess. However, had I warned them, Simone might have been tipped off, and I wouldn't have gotten the incriminating photos I needed. I didn't actually need the photos for court unless her lawyer decided to play hardball. If that happened, the photos and sworn testimonies from 6 individuals about their affair would come out. I used the term affair with hesitation. I wasn't sure if Simone was in love with this guy or if she had initially been coerced. One sworn statement from Greg's coworkers suggested he had something over Simone at the start. My lawyer was having a field day with the case against Simone's employer. He filed the case this morning while I was preparing to visit the motel. He had filed in court and then quickly contacted the company's lawyers. They were understandably in denial at first, but the mention of sworn statements changed their tune. My lawyer informed me that Simone, her lover, and possibly others involved were likely to be terminated from their jobs unless they had a reasonable excuse for their behavior. The case for alienation of affection against Greg was strong, given his employer's actions. We had sworn statements from 3 of his and 1 of her coworkers about their sneaking around at work. Supervisors had also speculated about them, but no one had confronted them or informed me. We also had affidavits from the motel owner and a cleaning lady. 6 witnesses and my photos provided solid proof of their illicit meetings on company time. They had used the motel to avoid their coworkers' attention after Greg realized they were becoming too conspicuous. He was aware of the company's strict policies on workplace romance, and my lawyer had gathered extensive information, including the company's code of ethics and relationship policies. I discovered that Simone and the jerk had been together for a bit more than 5 weeks when I started noticing things were off. By the time I caught them at the motel, Simone had been cheating on me for just over 10 weeks. Discovering the truth 5 weeks ago was one of the hardest moments of my life. I've had 3 such moments so far, and I hope never to experience another. The history, Simone's version. Jonathan and I hadn't been getting along as well as we used to. He was busy with several work projects, and we had talked about how it was cutting into our personal lives. I knew his hard work would likely lead to a promotion in a few months. At my job, Greg discovered that I had made a mistake on some employee records. It wasn't a huge error, but it was serious enough to jeopardize my next promotion and raise. Greg, being the kind of man he is, used that information to blackmail me into meeting him for lunch one day. That meeting led to a one-time sexual favor to avoid repercussions from my mistake. Although I wasn't happy about it, the fact that Jonathan and I hadn't been getting along well or having much sex in the past 6 months made it somewhat bearable. I didn't realize it at first, but that meeting with Greg made me aware of things I felt I was missing in life. Jonathan had been my only partner ever, and being with Greg opened up a dam inside me. That first time with Greg was in his office during lunch. Everyone had left, and I stayed behind. Greg had even brought a small bottle of my favorite wine, along with cheese and crackers. Our lunch breaks were usually an hour, with everyone going to local restaurants or street vendors. I usually bought something quick from a street vendor and ate alone in the park. That first day, no one missed us. Greg turned out to be nicer than the blackmailer I had feared. That first encounter was a letting go for me. After that day, I found myself wanting more, even though I knew it was wrong and I still loved my husband. Greg treated me in a way that allowed me to let go and be someone else entirely. He ordered me to do things, and while I wasn't thrilled at first, I complied. By the end of that lunch, I had done things with Greg I had never done with Jonathan. Greg was the first man to climax in my mouth, and I swallowed to avoid staining my dress. Greg was also the first man to finger my anus. We did it over his desk, with my body bent over and my dress pulled up. When his cock slipped between my pussy lips, I came hard. It felt so dirty, so sexy. My hands gripped the edges of his desk as Greg thrust in and out of me. His cock wasn't longer than Jonathan's, but it was thicker, making it feel huge inside me. As I approached my second orgasm, Greg's fingers slipped into my anus, 2 at first, then 3. In those moments, I became someone else, and that transformation was as intoxicating as it was devastating. After I thought Greg had finished, he pulled out and ordered me to suck him clean. I complied, and surprisingly, his cock didn't go soft. Suddenly, another load of cum shot into my throat, the second load I had swallowed in less than an hour. Later, I learned that Greg hadn't ejaculated inside my pussy but had held off, wanting to see me suck his cum out of his cock. He could never get his wife to do that, so he wanted it from me. We barely managed to tidy up before the others returned, and I left his office feeling less angry towards him than when it all began. As the day went on and I tasted him on my lips, I found myself thinking about the next time. It was a sudden, unbidden thought, and it told me that I wanted Greg again. Greg wanted more too. He approached me the next day, and we repeated our office encounter. This time, I attacked him, and we fucked until he came deep inside me. He began to make snide remarks about Jonathan, but I was so engrossed in the sex that I barely noticed. Over the next 2 weeks, Greg kept belittling Jonathan while we were intimate. He even suggested that Jonathan must be cheating on me. Given the state of my home life, I soon adopted Greg's attitude. I began to criticize and belittle Jonathan to everyone except my parents. I feared they would see through me, so I maintained the facade of a dutiful, loving wife around them. Just before the motel trysts began, Jonathan and I were on the outs, and Greg and I had gone from having sex to a full-blown affair. Greg was the first to take my anal virginity. Initially painful, it later became something I craved. I found myself begging Greg to do it harder and faster. I never thought I would enjoy anal sex, let alone beg for it. Sucking Greg off became my passion. I developed a taste for cum and sometimes preferred to taste him rather than fuck him. One day, I actually climaxed while sucking him, and when I came down from my orgasm, I realized my lips were pressed hard at the base of his cock. I had taken him all the way into my throat. This became a routine for us. I'd work on his cock until I had him fully in my mouth and down my throat. The power this gave me was intoxicating. Greg suggested using the motel to keep meeting until we could figure out something more permanent. His wife was getting suspicious, and he thought someone at work might have mentioned our closeness to her. We never discussed leaving our spouses, it was all about the hot sex. The more we met, the hotter it got. Just before Jonathan discovered us, Greg started talking about inviting another man to join us. At first, I was reluctant, but after Greg's persuasive talk, I began wondering what it would be like. If Jonathan hadn't intervened, I probably would have been with more than one man in less than a month. Greg knew exactly what to say and how to act to make me do things I had never even considered doing with Jonathan. I should have realized that with Jonathan, there was love, respect, and understanding. I gave that up for sex and lust. Greg demanded and took what he wanted, and I gave in with little or no resistance. Jonathan, on the other hand, always respected me and never would have taken anything without my complete consent. Greg could dominate and command me because there was no love between us. He saw me as a little slut he could manipulate, while his wife provided him with emotional support. In contrast, I took Greg's negative comments about Jonathan to heart and severed my emotional connection with my husband for the sake of the sexual high I had with Greg. Looking back, I now see that I made the biggest mistake of my life 10 weeks ago, and there's no way to undo it. I remember the last time Jonathan and I had what I would call great sex. We'd been to my parents' house for dinner. Mom and Dad had been away on a trip and were so full of love and laughter that it was contagious. On the way home, I snuggled up to Jonathan as he drove, unzipped his pants, and began to stroke and fondle his cock. He almost drove into the ditch twice before we got home. Once home, we ran into the living room, and I stripped as the front door closed. If anyone had been walking by, they would have seen me topless, struggling to get my pantyhose off. Jonathan picked me up in his strong arms and carried me into the bedroom. He placed me gently on the bed, and his hot breath was the first thing I felt on my pussy. Jonathan loved to eat me out. He seemed to live for it at times. His tongue worked magic on me, parting my pussy lips, delving inside, tickling my clit, moving around, up and down, its rough texture switching to smooth and slick, then rough again. God, I loved how Jonathan used to eat me out. I kept my legs spread wide, and Jonathan's fingers slipped into my pussy. Always careful, he moved slowly, making sure I was ready before he got firmer or rougher. Oh yeah, he could be rough and abrupt, catching me off guard while fucking me deeply. Why I had gone for Greg the way I did is something I never really understood. Other than the issues I felt Jonathan and I had, there was no reason. Now, I can clearly see that those issues were just my problems spiraling out of control. I was the issue. I had always wanted to suck Jonathan off, but he'd usually stop me before he came, wanting to please me more while he still could. I never insisted on continuing, though at times I wondered what it would feel like, taste like, or be like to have him come in my mouth. That evening, Jonathan transitioned from gentle lovemaking to a passionate intensity one hadn't experienced before. It was as if he transformed into a primal force, not overly forceful but assertive enough to ignite my passion. Looking back, amidst the turmoil, I cherish that memory as a moment untainted by the events involving Greg. We made love for hours, almost until dawn, enveloped in each other's embrace. I nestled against my husband, reassured by the knowledge of his deep love and desire for me. Yet, several weeks later, I found myself entangled in Greg's manipulations. Reflecting on that first step I took with Greg, I wonder why I didn't resist his coercion or demand him to reveal what he claimed to have on me. Why did I allow my career aspirations and fears to drive a wedge between my husband and me? How did I succumb so easily? In hindsight, I regret not exploring new experiences with Jonathan and not being the passionate partner he deserved, instead of surrendering to someone like Greg. I never loved Greg, it was Jonathan whom I loved. We had our rough patches, as all marriages do, but instead of persevering, I chose the path of momentary pleasure in another man's arms. What pains me the most is bearing the label of a cheater. That's what I've become, a cheater. They say, once a cheater, always a cheater. Now, I must live with that reality. When Jonathan walked into the room that day, I was paralyzed with shock. I tried to hide, to push Greg away. As Greg approached Jonathan, threateningly, Jonathan swiftly incapacitated him. It was a moment of surreal violence, with Greg knocked out cold and Jonathan standing there, his demeanor transformed. Jonathan's eyes, usually warm, were now icy blue, piercing into mine with a gaze I couldn't bear. Ashamed and afraid, I sought refuge in the bedsheet, unable to meet his gaze. Jonathan accused me, tossing divorce papers onto the bed before leaving, his departure leaving me shattered and bewildered. Afterwards, I retreated to the shower, consumed by guilt and self-loathing. I didn't check on Greg, I didn't care about his condition. When the motel manager came by, I learned that Jonathan had acquired a key, a detail that added to my sense of betrayal and humiliation. The manager regarded me with disdain, recounting his own marital betrayal as he handed over the key. He didn't need to elaborate, I was acutely aware of the magnitude of my mistake. I had recklessly discarded the most precious thing in my life, all for the illusion of something special. The next day, I faced a tribunal in my office, the president, the human resources manager, and a company lawyer. I confessed everything, holding nothing back, as colleagues passed by, casting judgment with their glances. I anticipated being shown the door by day's end. However, it didn't play out that way. First, HR established that my initial encounter with Greg was coerced, and then they had me sign papers regarding our involvement. Before lunchtime, I was unemployed, granted severance pay as a formality. The company couldn't keep me, but due to Greg's coercion, they owed me that much. Meanwhile, Greg was escorted out by security and handed over to the police. It turned out he'd been engaged in further illicit activities, which surfaced during questioning. Greg found himself in serious legal trouble. Later, I learned about Greg's embezzlement from the company. It had started small but accumulated into grand larceny charges. His wife left him, taking their children back east to her parents' home. Greg languished in jail awaiting trial. Initially asked to testify, I realized my testimony might do more harm than good, and the district attorney agreed to exclude me. Greg's lawyer, considering my testimony, also deemed me unfit for the stand. Returning home was agonizing. My father was furious, hurling accusations I couldn't refute. But it was my mother's pained gaze that seared into my soul. Her words echoed endlessly in my mind. "You've committed the gravest mistake imaginable. You've not only disappointed your parents and yourself, but also betrayed your husband. You, young lady, have single-handedly destroyed 2 marriages and shattered your husband's love. You've sunk to the lowest depths. Despite being your mother, I can't respect what you've done. Life has been challenging since then. Being unemployed and living with parents who have been profoundly affected by my actions is stressful. Jonathan kept his promise, and we split our assets evenly. I relinquished my share of our home, and he sold it promptly. I'm trying to rebuild my life now. I miss my husband terribly, and I regret ever straying. I know it's too little, too late. The stigma of being a cheater looms over me, and it may take a long time, if ever, to shake it off. But I'm starting anew. I hope to eventually move forward and not be haunted by this pain every hour. Jonathan left his job and relocated across the country. I think he couldn't bear the thought of being in the same state as his cheating wife. It was a painful lesson learned, or at least I hope I've learned. Only time will tell. As I left the motel room that day, I felt numb. Simone remained on the bed, crying, while Greg lay unconscious. The motel manager met me in the hallway and offered some comforting words. It's tough now, but it will get better. Move forward, discover yourself, and eventually find someone else. You'll be okay. I won't sugarcoat it, it'll be painful for a while. It depends on how much you loved her and cared for her. Thanks. I had figured that much, but hearing it from someone who's been through it is reassuring. See you around. No offense, but I hope not. I walked away, crying when I got home. It may not be considered manly, but the pain was real. Doris called me to inform me that she and Sam had taken Simone in. They sounded lost, and it broke my heart. There were good people caught up in this mess. Days passed, and Simone didn't contest anything in the divorce proceedings. It went smoothly. Both my lawyer and her seemed surprised. She had no fight left in her. I could see she was suffering, but at least she didn't try to justify her actions. Once the divorce was finalized, the case against her former employer wrapped up. They just wanted me gone and were willing to cover my legal fees, court costs, and more just to make it happen. Greg ended up in jail. I took some satisfaction in that. Now he'll experience a different kind of intimacy, hopefully on the receiving end this time. I have no sympathy for him. He's not a man, just a shell. He had a wife and 3 kids. I met her once during the divorce chaos. She was a beautiful woman. Greg was a fool. He had everything and threw it away for some fleeting thrill he couldn't find at home. I submitted my resignation. My employers were taken aback. They made efforts to persuade me to stay, but I had too many personal issues affecting my work. After they realized I was determined to leave, they kindly offered me a commendatory letter which I accepted. I've since started a new job on the West Coast. It's been about a year since I moved here. I've met a wonderful woman. She's truly special. Although I'm still a bit hesitant when it comes to trust, we share a common experience. Her ex-husband also cheated on her. As for our intimate life, you might be curious. Well, let's just say we're quite adventurous. I'm committed to ensuring both of our happiness in that aspect for the long haul. Our relationship is well-rounded, and we're connecting on multiple levels. Having dated a bit post-divorce, I can recognize a good thing when I see it. Hopefully, she feels the same about me. Life has been a reality check, but I believe things are gradually improving. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.